UFC Sao Paulo betting and DraftKings show. We have 13 fights this weekend. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. In kicking things off, we have Mark Diakiese, a minus 170 favorite. The comeback on UFC newcomer Kaue Fernandez is plus 145. And right off the bat, we have an interesting matchup because Diakiese, I think, clearly has more decision equity in this fight. I think there's little debate on that, but I actually think Fernandez has more finishing potential. And that's where maybe we disagree with the market a little bit. So for DraftKings, this is a slate that I don't love a ton of these underdogs. I think Fernandez is going to be relatively low owned and has some finishing ability here. So I'm looking to get an overweight stance to him depending on how ownership shakes out. But in terms of the matchup, Diakiese, we know what he's going to bring to the table, right? He's a flashy kickboxer, a lot of spinning kicks, pretty low volume, but he has shown the ability to go to his wrestling lately. He's averaging over 3 takedowns per 15 minutes. That seems to be a path to victory for him in a lot of his recent fights. And on the flip side, Kaue Fernandez, he seems to be a pretty solid fighter, fought over in LFA, had a couple knockout victories, both of them with his legs. He's got this high kick that he likes to throw when he separates from the clinch. He finished his last opponent that way, and he tried it once again in a previous LFA fight. Didn't work as well, but he does look for that quite a bit when they separate off the clinch, and he's just really active with his legs, stays pretty tight in terms of the striking, but I just think he's kind of a gas bag. He does have a little bit of ground game, black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu when he does take guys down, mostly upper body takedowns, but does have solid control, can pass. He looks pretty good in dominant position. It's when he's taken down, when he's put on his back, that's when he doesn't look so good. And the few times that we have seen him get extended in fights, he looks pretty tired. Going back to that LFA fight that he lost, his only career loss, was against an okay guy, undefeated Brazilian prospect on the other side, but it was mainly due to the cardio. He won round 1 pretty dominantly, spent time in top position for the majority of the round and really just completely gassed after that and lost the next 2. Nearly got himself finished as well. So I don't trust the cardio. I think he's got to win by finish and it's got to come early. And if that doesn't happen, I think more than likely we see Diakiese take over, land takedowns, bank some control time. So Diakiese by decision is going to be the official pick. But in terms of DraftKings, I'm going to have exposure to both sides this week. And next fight up, we have Eduardo Mora, a minus 550 favorite, one of the biggest betting favorites on the card, with Montserrat Ruiz on the comeback at plus 410. And this one we don't have to spend a ton of time on because Ruiz, we know what she brings to the table. She's that one-dimensional head and arms, scarf hold choke that she had against Cheyenne Vlismas, who couldn't get out of it. But that's all she has. And better grapplers are just not going to fall for that. Jacqueline Amorim, a much better submission grappler. She ended up getting the finish in the 3rd round, nearly got the finish before that. But that type of stuff is not going to work against the better grapplers. And I think Mora is one of those better grapplers because this is a fighter who, if you guys watch my Dana White's Contender Series videos in the past, this past season she fought, we didn't know much about her, young Brazilian prospect, trains at Gelton Almeida's camp, who's also on this card, headlining this card, but she just turned pro about a year and a half ago. Not a ton of data, not a ton of tape, but she's very, very physical, and she competes in a lot of these grappling tournaments. She's only a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but she's very physical, and you see that in her fight. She got the finish on Contender Series, won by submission, cashed a submission ticket for us there, so shout out to her. But she's just very, very physically strong, good in top position, very aggressive when she gets the fight to the mount. She's got heavy ground and pound, and she's going to hunt for submissions. So I think this one, where she's fighting somebody who's going to be a willing dance partner in terms of the grappling against Ruiz, I think this fight's going to hit the mat, and that's where I strongly favor Eduardo Mora, and I think she gets it done. So we're going Mora by submission. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Denise Gomes, a minus 125 favorite. The comeback on Angela Hill is plus 105. And this is one where I think Angela Hill is live to give Denise Gomes that vet lesson. Denise Gomes is somebody who previously fought on Contender Series a couple seasons ago, but she has made a name for herself in the UFC. She dropped her short notice UFC debut against Loma Lukbunmi, but gave her a go in that fight, and since then has 2 upset knockout finishes as an underdog. So she's clearly gaining a lot of momentum here, but I think now she's just getting to a point in the betting market where she's just getting a little bit too much respect because of those big knockout victories. And it's very clear that she does have power. She's going to be the much harder hitter in this matchup against Angela Hill. But I think in terms of the striking, Angela Hill is a much better technical striker. She comes from a Muay Thai background. She's a high volume striker, so we know she can match the volume of Gomes. So it's going to be a case of, does the power win out of Gomes, or is it going to be the more defensively sound, the cleaner striker, the one who's more proven, who can push that pace for 15 minutes? Because in the past, we have seen Gomes start to slow down at times as well. So I just think it's a spot where Angela Hill has kind of been there and seen that. She's fought the best that the division has to offer, and we've seen her kind of derail some hype trains in the past as well. Emily Ducati comes to mind. You know, that's a similar matchup to this one, Gomes being more powerful, but the way to beat Angela Hill, historically speaking, is to take her down, force her to grapple, take advantage of those issues. Gomes is not going to do that. And even if she tries, I actually think Hill is the one with more grappling potential. But more than likely, I think this one is a 15-minute kickboxing match. I think it's very competitive. I'm going to slightly lean with the underdog in the veteran Angela Hill, who I think is still a very tough litmus test as a solid gatekeeper in this division. So we're going Hill by decision. That's the official pick. And on a slate, like I mentioned, that I don't like a ton of these underdogs, even though I don't think this fight is really going to pop off in terms of DraftKings scoring, I do have interest just to save some salary on the underdog in Angela Hill, just because there are so few underdogs that I actually like. So I kind of find myself gravitating to her in that mid 7K range on DraftKings. Next fight up in the light heavyweight division, we have Vitor Petrino, a minus 218 favorite. The comeback on Modestas Bukauskas is plus 180. And this one where I strongly favor Petrino in this matchup. You know, shout out to him. He cashed that late round submission ticket for a lot of us. But I honestly think in this matchup, he has every advantage over Bukauskas. Bukauskas is a guy, he's not a very skilled fighter. I always seem to have a little bit of interest in Bukauskas as a big underdog in the right matchups, because he is a guy that does have a lot of heart despite not having a ton of skills. But I think this is a pretty brutal matchup because Bukauskas is generally just a low volume leg kicker who likes to stay on the outside, doesn't have a ton of power, and he struggles to defend takedowns, don't really trust his defensive grappling. On the flip side, Petrino, 9-0, undefeated prospect, fighting out of his home crowd in Brazil. I think he clearly has finishing potential in this fight. Super explosive knockout power, but we've seen more recently in his last couple fights, he's able to go to those takedowns. He's able to land multiple takedowns. The cardio has checked out, so he's got better cardio, better wrestler, better grappling, more power on the feet as well, more knockout potential. I think he wins this fight wherever it goes. I think he's a great target on DraftKings. He's going to be popular, but I do think he gets the finish. We're going Petrino by knockout. That's the official pick. Next fight up in the bantamweight division, we have Daniel Marcos, a minus 245 favorite. The comeback on Victor Hugo is plus 200. And we'll start on the Marcos side. This is a guy who fought on Contender Series a couple seasons ago. He was coming off a long layoff, fighting out of Peru, and he ended up beating a guy, Brandon Lewis, and really just beat him pillar to post, hurt him multiple times in that fight. And that's really his best asset, is he does have really fast hands. He will throw high volume combinations. He works the body very well. We saw that in his UFC debut against Simon Oliveira. He hurt him to the body multiple times and ended up finishing him, got the knockout victory. But he followed that up against Davy Grant, where honestly I thought it was very uninspiring, and I believe I bet him in that spot. He ended up squeaking out a split decision victory. I'm not even sure that he won that fight. He got outlanded in every single round. Did land one takedown, but I kind of think that Marcos is getting a little bit too much respect. You know, previously coming into that Contender Series fight that I mentioned, this is a guy who everybody just wrote off as a complete bum, can crusher on the Peru regional scene, and now he's just getting a ton of respect against a guy who's probably the same level of fighter in Victor Hugo, another Contender Series fighter, Brazilian, so he's fighting in front of his home crowd. This is a pretty big number here, and Victor Hugo, as we saw on his Contender Series fight this season, he's a very dangerous submission grappler. He's very experienced as well, has like 30 fights on the regional scene, and some of those were against some pretty solid competition. And I just think he's a guy who is very explosive. I think he's more powerful than Marcos. The volume isn't going to be there. Marcos is going to be high volume, landing more, but when Hugo actually lands, the power is for real. Now, what I don't like about Hugo in terms of the striking is he's going to try a ton of spinning techniques, and not a lot of them are going to land. Sometimes it allows him to be taken down, gets his back taken, etc. But once he's on the mat, and he can land takedowns himself to get the fight there, once he's down there, he's very dangerous. He's always hunting submissions, as we saw in that Contender Series fight, got the knee bar submission. He's always hunting knee bars, heel hooks. He's very dangerous if you allow him to wrap up your legs. So this is one where, even though I think Marcos is probably going to get out ahead on the feet because of that volume and that pressure, I don't trust him. I think we still have questions about his takedown defense. We still have questions about his defensive grappling. Brandon Lewis, he stuffed a ton of his takedowns, but Lewis was hurt pretty much immediately. He was hurt multiple times. A lot of those takedown attempts were very telegraphed and weak. I want to see him against a guy who's very physically strong, like Victor Hugo, who, once he does land a takedown, he's very good at controlling his opponents and hunting those submissions, like I mentioned. So, and then lastly, I mentioned he fought Simon Oliveira in his UFC debut. Oliveira is a training partner of Victor Hugo, so you don't think he's going to tell him what to watch out for? Hey, he's going to look to rip the body quite a bit, and Hugo fights with his hands down a lot too, so he's generally protecting that body. I don't think there's going to be many openings in terms of the body shots as much as there was against Oliveira. So just another little nugget there. And then I mentioned the home crowd as well. It's enough. All those things combined is enough for me to have interest in plus 200 underdog here, and I think he could potentially get a finish as well. So we're going Victor Hugo by submission. That's the official pick. Next fight up in the welterweight division, we have Rinat Fakhretdinov, a minus 355 favorite. The comeback on Eliza Zaleski dos Santos is plus 280. And you guys know, if you've been following me for a while on Twitter and watching these YouTube videos, I'm a huge Fakhretdinov fan. He has cashed multiple tickets for us so far on his UFC run here, and he has been absolutely dominant through his 3 UFC fights. His first couple fights landed multiple takedowns and basically controlled his opponents for almost every single minute of both of those fights, and then followed that up with a first-round submission victory, a club and sub over Kevin Lee. So he's really just been an all-out stud. He's a big favorite here in what is likely his toughest test to date in Zaleski dos Santos. But I also think this is actually a really good matchup for him, because Zaleski dos Santos, while he's very dangerous on the feet, he's known as a very exciting striker. He's got a lot of explosive knockout ability. Most of his wins have come by knockout. He's never really been able to defend takedowns. He defends takedowns at just 65%. He's not the best defensive grappler either. And now you're looking at a guy in Fakhretdinov who's gonna land multiple takedowns and who's a very good control grappler. And I think those things are the kryptonite for Dos Santos here. So even though Zaleski dos Santos is probably the better striker, I just don't think it really matters here, because Fakhretdinov is going to pressure him until he closes distance, gets in on the legs, takes him down, and probably just holds him there for as long as the fight lasts. So we're going Fakhretdinov by decision. That's the official pick. And next fight up, we have Elvis Brainer, a minus 170 favorite. The comeback on Kenan Kraszewski is plus 145. And Kraszewski is actually stepping in on short notice to replace Esteban Rybovics, who had to pull out on short notice here. So Kraszewski is another Contender Series fighter who fought on this past season. He won by first round submission, cashed a submission ticket for us there. But I'd be surprised if he's able to replicate that type of performance, because even though he's a very explosive striker on the feet and he's an opportunistic submission grappler, he's going up against a guy in Brenner who has now had back-to-back huge upset victories, who's game on the feet. He's going to be coming at you full pace and pressure for 15 minutes if needed. And he's actually a good grappler. Coming into his UFC debut, he was known as more of a grappler. The majority of his wins on the regional scene have actually come by submission. I think he's the better submission grappler than Kraszewski here. And on the feet, I think he's got much better cardio. I think that's the biggest difference in this fight, because Kraszewski is very explosive, but I don't really trust the durability and I don't trust the gas tank. And those are two things that I really trust on the Brenner side. So I think Brenner is probably going to take over if the fight gets extended and get the finish here. We're going Brenner by TKO. That's the official pick. And kicking off the main card here, we have the older Bonfim brother, Ismael Bonfim, a minus 520 favorite. The comeback on Vince Pichel is plus 390. And I don't have to spend a ton of time on this matchup because there's not really much to discuss here. The time to fade Bonf was last fight against Benoit Saint Denis. A lot of sharp people were all over that. I think here, they're clearly looking to build him back up, give him a very winnable fight in front of his home crowd where his brother is fighting on the main card as well. The last time these two fought on the same card was that Contender Series card 2 seasons ago, and they both got contracts. So I think that's what they're trying to set up here is 2 electric finishes by the Bonfim brothers in front of a Brazilian crowd. And I think that's what's going to happen because Vince Pichel, maybe a few years ago you could make a case for him, but he turns 41 years old in just a couple weeks. I think he's shot to bits here. I think he's going to struggle with the footwork, the speed, the punching combinations of Bonfim. And I think Bonfim is really just going to swarm him, overwhelm him, and get the finish. So we're going Bonfim by TKO. That's the official pick. When it comes to DraftKings, though, there's so many good fighters in that upper 9K range that, pick your poison. I think they're pretty much all pretty solid plays, but I just don't really see myself getting to a ton of Bonfim, even though I do think he gets a knockout finish here. Next fight up in the middleweight division, we have Rodolfo Vieira, a minus 110 pick'em against Armen Petrosyan. And this is an interesting matchup because it's very clear to me that Rodolfo Vieira has more finishing upside in this fight, but I think Petrosyan has more decision equity. Like I mentioned with Mark Diakese in the opening matchup, I think this is one where Petrosyan has seen these type of matchups multiple times in his career. For whatever reason, he tends to always get matched up with guys that have to take him down, that want to control him on the mat. The thing is, he's very difficult to control. He's pretty easy to take down, sure, but he's very hard to put on flat on his back and control him for extended periods. And the thing about Vieira is his wrestling has never been that good. He's a guy who's a very dangerous submission grappler. I've spoken very highly of him in the past and probably overrated him to a degree, to the point where I'm just kind of over him at this point. Like, he's always going to have that nasty submission grappling. He's always going to have round 1 finishing ability. But as we've seen time and time again in multiple fights where he just struggles to get the fight to the ground. And it just makes you very, very nervous watching him in some of these striking exchanges, because even though his striking has come a long way, his defense has not. He's very, very hittable. We've seen him hurt multiple times, multiple fights where he's had, broken orbitals. He got dropped against Cody Brundage in his last fight, nearly finished. So even in matchups that are like tailor-made for him, he still makes it as difficult as you can imagine. And so I have some concerns against Petrosyan, who, yes, he probably takes him down. If he can't control him and Petrosyan just keeps popping back to his feet and making him work for those takedowns and taxing that cardio, Vieira has been known to gas multiple times. I think if that happens here, Petrosyan's going to make it count and take over as the fight goes on. So we're going Petrosyan by TKO. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our next fight, as Kai Bohayo is a minus 295 favorite. The comeback on Abu Sapien Magomedov is plus 240. And Kai Bohayo is 4-0 in the UFC, and he's just a very smart, high IQ fighter. And I always talk about that because you see it in a lot of his fights. Even when he's facing guys that are super dangerous on the feet, he's not forcing in the takedowns. He's not rushing anything, but he plays it very safe while the fight plays out at range. He manages distance very well, uses those body kicks, and then when he's going to close distance, he closes distance very quickly, and it's usually after he's striking long enough to where his opponents aren't going to, he's not telegraphing anything, so they're not really knowing when he's going to shoot and look to get those takedowns. So, and then when he does get the takedowns, if he gets on your back, if he gets a body triangle, any of those things, like, you're not getting up. So he's a very good control grappler. Obviously, he's capable of finding a finish as well. On the flip side, Abu Sapien Magomedov is coming off the main event loss against Sean Strickland, where he got knocked out in the second round. And really, it was just all due to the gas tank, right? Like, this dude is he's got round 1 finishing upside, sure. But outside of that, a lot of people were able to sniff that out prior to the Strickland fight. And I think it's just ever more so obvious now, to where this dude is round 1 or bust to me. And in this fight against Kai Bohayo, who's very defensively sound, and I mentioned doesn't take a ton of chances on the feet, I just don't think this dude has much of a path to victory here in Magomedov. I think Bohaio is going to play it safe and then eventually tax the gas tank with that grappling and find a finish. We're going Kai Bohaio by submission. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our next fight in the heavyweight division as Rodrigo Nascimento comes in as a -192 favorite. The comeback on Dontel Mays is +160. And this fight actually took place back in 2020. It was the UFC debut of Nascimento, and he ended up winning by submission in the second round. And even though there's been, 3 years since the last time these guys fought, there's been improvements on both sides, at least a little bit. I kind of see the fight playing out similarly in that Rodrigo Nascimento is going to have the biggest advantage in this fight, and that is his grappling. Even though he's not a super aggressive grappler, when he does go to the grappling and gets the fight to the mat, he is a pretty dangerous submission grappler, at least for the heavyweight division. And against a guy like Dontel Mays, who's just completely untrustworthy, and I don't think has much defensive grappling chops either, he's only been able to take advantage of other guys that didn't know how to grapple. So that's not going to be the case here. And I think on the feet, it's kind of just going to be a low volume, both guys kind of respecting each other's power type deal until they clinch up and eventually hit the mat, which is what I think happens. So we're going Nascimento. I think he gets his hand raised here, but it's going to be a fight that I'm probably just looking to avoid on DraftKings. Which brings us to the co-main event. As I mentioned earlier, we have the other Bonfim brother, the younger brother. He's a -600 favorite. The comeback on Nicholas Dalby is +440. And I do favor the Bonfim brother here, much similar to his brother's matchup. I think they're giving him a pretty winnable fight. Nicholas Dalby is a veteran of the sport, still has somewhat of a name. He's put together a nice little win streak here despite turning 39 years old later this month. But I just think this is a spot where he's going to be outmatched in terms of the athleticism, the quickness, the power on the feet. I think that's going to be very clear. And even though Bonfim does have that explosive power, it's the submission grappling that he tends to fall back on. Most of his wins have actually come by submission, including his last fight where he got the first round sub over Trevin Giles. So this is one where I just think he's going to have multiple advantages here. And Nicholas Dalby, I think you can make a case for him if he were to survive that first round and extend this fight. Then there's a chance he can kind of take over in rounds 2 and 3, maybe weasel out a close decision here if Bonfim tends to fade. But I think it's kind of just wishful thinking here. I don't really trust the durability at this stage in Dalby's career. I know he's technically never been knocked out, but we've seen him hurt time and time again in a lot of his fights here. So I just think Bonfim can probably clip him or snatch up the neck here and get the finish. So we're going Bonfim by submission. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our main event as Jailton Almeida is a -500 favorite. He takes on Derek Lewis on the comeback at +380. This was obviously supposed to be Curtis Blades in this spot. That would have been a much more intriguing matchup. In this matchup, I think it's very clear Derek Lewis probably just has to get lucky and land a big punch in round 1 and probably in the first 2 minutes, I'd say, because outside of that, he's going to be on his back here with a very dangerous man on top of him in Jailton Almeida, who's just a super explosive athlete, very, very powerful, can land ground and pound, can hunt submissions as well. He's just the dual threat. He could do it all. The one thing he's not so great at is striking defense. So obviously Lewis can clip him, but I don't think he's going to have much of a chance because I expect Almeida to close distance right away, get the fight to the ground where he needs it. And honestly, I think he finishes Derek Lewis in round 1 at a very high clip here. So we're going Almeida by TKO. That's the official pick. And as always, guys, fightnumbers.com will have my DraftKings player rankings broken down by salary tier. It'll have my ownership projections as well. It's completely free, and I'll pin it in the comments. As always, appreciate you watching. Best of luck, and we'll see you guys next time.